From the newsrooms of the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age, this is Please Explain. I'm Samantha Selinger-Morris. It's Tuesday, September 19th. Australia has the worst mammal extinction rate of any continent, and cats are high on the list of just who or what is to blame. Various politicians have been bemoaning this reality for years, but the killing of our native wildlife has continued, virtually unabated. Now, Environment Minister Tanya Plibersek has a new plan of attack. It targets not just feral cats, which Plibersek called walking, stalking, ruthless killers, but pet cats too. The move is pitting wildlife researchers, who are happy with the new plan, against cat lovers. Today, federal health reporter Natassia Chrysanthos on what happens when the government targets your tabby as public enemy number one, and whether this new plan will justify the cost to pet owners. So, Natassia, every cat owner most likely has a story about their furry loved one bringing them home, something of a surprise, whether it's a possum, a lizard, maybe a bird. Just how bad is this problem in Australia?
So Australia's Threatened Species Commissioner says cats are one of the biggest problems when it comes to threatening native wildlife in Australia. So feral cats specifically, and there are somewhere between 1 and 5 billion feral cats in Australia depending on weather conditions such as drought. But they've played a role, we think, in 2/3 of mammal extinctions over the last 200 years in Australia. They currently threaten over 200 nationally listed threatened species, such as the greater bilby, the numbat, and Gilbert's potteroo. Of the 29 mammal species that have gone extinct in Australia, cats have been the main contributor to 20 of them. And Australia has one of the worst mammal extinction rates of any country in the world. So it is a big problem, and that is talking about feral cats. But what we also know, or what the government is also telling us, based on the best research that it has available, is the 5-ish billion pet cats we have in Australia are also killing native wildlife. Now, it's not quite at the rate that we see with feral cats, but the number of animals killed by pet cats each year is estimated to be around 500 million native animals, which is compared to about 1.5 billion native animals for feral cats. So it's not as big a problem scale-wise, but it's not at all insignificant.
Right. And now Tanya Plibersek has declared war on feral cats with a goal of no new extinctions. So what is her department proposing?
So in terms of feral cat containment, it might look like fencing certain areas to contain cats and prevent them roaming. It can also look like killing feral cats, and there are various different ways that governments have tried to do this and local governments have tried to do this in the past. But the abatement plan presents a few of those different options and suggests that perhaps where in Australia you are should determine the strategy that you use for this feral cat problem. But what it also does is talk a little bit about pet cats.
We know that people love their domestic cats. Well, they have to look after them. They have to keep them inside. They have to stop them killing wildlife. And those feral cats, well, they're fair game because those feral cats are an environmental disaster.
And so at the federal government level, that potentially looks like streamlining legislation that will allow state and local governments to take clearer actions and more consistent actions. And some of those things could be cat curfews, so forcing cats to stay inside at night. It could be 24/7 cat containment, which is forcing cats to stay inside all the time. It could involve certain caps on how many pet cats a person can have, or requirements for registration, once you cross a certain threshold, or for breeders.
Okay, and you've just mentioned there what is key to Tanya Plibersek's plan here, which is that she's targeting not just feral cats, but pet cats, like you say. And this has stirred up a lot of controversy. A lot of cat owners aren't happy. There's been animal activists that have been concerned on a number of levels. So can you walk us through this?
Yes, I think it's kind of inevitable when you start talking about pet cats that you're going to stir up more feeling and sentiment in the community.
Cats are actually man's best friend.
Connection to cats and our appreciation of them, I think, is a lot deeper and older.
But whether it's feral cats or pet cats, among people who really love and care for animals, they don't want to see or hear any animal being demeaned in such a way. And also in some of these conversations, I think there was a concern that if we start talking about cats as awful devil cats, people are probably more likely to be violent towards cats or have little concern for their welfare because they become this kind of second-class species, if you will. Now, one of the big concerns that was raised with me when I was talking to people who work in animal and cat welfare, particularly in the cities, is that they feel what's been left out of this picture or this discussion is the issue of stray cats. Now, stray cats are the ones that are roaming around the streets in urban areas. They're not feral cats. They're very specifically not feral cats because feral cats, like we said, are those cats that are in the wild that don't have any interaction with humans. Even if you put in some of these suggestions, such as cat curfews, cat containment, there is no one to contain stray cats. And stray cats are the ones that aren't desexed, so they're the ones that are rapidly reproducing, and they are roaming the streets constantly, right? So they are going to have a greater impact on local wildlife.
Some people have argued that a lot of the measures that the government is proposing, like containment and desexing, if they're enforced, perhaps they aren't fair to those in lower income households and those who live in restricted apartment spaces. So should the onus be on the cat owner?
And I guess this is a real debate, right? Like all things, if you're going to take on a responsibility such as a cat, that has consequences. But then some people are socially isolated. Some people are lonely. For those kind of people, cats can be a really important part of their lives and well-being. And one of the ladies I spoke to said, these cat containment systems can be really expensive to install to make sure they're actually foolproof. And I don't think that these are probably the top line concerns when people are looking at this issue environmentally, which is, well, long term, we have a huge problem with loss of native species, right? And that should, according to a certain worldview, really be the utmost concern. But I think some of these issues do show some of the kind of niggly or tricky areas when it comes to actually executing this policy.
Right, which I guess gets to another point of all of this, which is that it's been going on for ages, targeting feral cats in particular in more remote parts of the country. There's been attempts to eradicate them from Christmas Island, from French Island. But domestic cats, as you've mentioned, are a massive problem too. In urban areas, various councils have 24-hour cat curfews, including in parts of Victoria and the ACT, which means that cats aren't allowed outside of your property at all times. So have any of those measures proved successful?
I think compliance is a tricky one, right? Because how many rangers are you going to employ to go around in urban areas and check that this is happening? Is this where councils want to spend resources? They've got a lot of other things to do as well. As the ACT Environment Minister explained to me, the early stages of these policies are really about education and working with people and communities to make sure they understand the rules, why they're in place, and kind of feel like they're part of this picture in terms of improving things for native wildlife. But I think the ACT would regard where it's gotten to so far as a success, and part of that journey going forward will just be ensuring that education piece continues, and then probably problem solving the compliance as it ticks along, because resourcing at all levels of government is a real issue.
So what do you think about the chances that this new proposal could actually work?
Well, talking to biodiversity researchers who have informed the government plan, to Australia's Threatened Species Commissioner, there's a lot of confidence that people actually will take this in their stride. They think Australians do care for the ecosystem that surrounds us, do have an affection and a care for our native species as well. I think part of it as well, in terms of the pets issue, is 50% of people around that mark already do keep their pets inside or their cats inside for a lot of the time. There is an appetite there. They also make the argument that indoor containment is good for cats as well, right? Like it lowers their risk of getting into fights with other cats, of picking up illnesses, of getting hit by cars. So there is a safety case to be made for the cat. So I think with enough education and with enough resourcing in terms of getting the message out there, and like we said, working with people where this could be a struggle for them and not leaving them behind in this journey. So getting to a point where you don't really need to enforce it with a stick, but people have taken on the responsibility themselves. I think there is probably a cause for hope there. I think the other issue is like we said, there are stray cats breeding all the time, all across Australian cities. And how is that going to be dealt with? And potentially that's where there does need to be a bit more collaboration between local government and some of these individuals and volunteers and charities who say it's kind of been left to them. Because without action on that area, you are going to have cats who aren't contained because they're not owned continuing to breed and run amok. So there is potentially a little grey space there that also needs to be part of addressing this issue.
Thank you, Natasja, for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me.
Today's episode of Please Explain was produced by Tammy Mills and Julia Carr-Ketzel. Our executive producer is Ruby Schwartz. Please Explain is a production of The Age and the Sydney Morning Herald. If you enjoy the show and want more of our journalism, subscribe to our newspapers today. It's the best way to support what we do. Search The Age or smh.com.au/subscribe. I'm Samantha Selinger Morris. This is Please Explain. Thanks for listening.